Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Barbara Peck, and I serve as the Public Art Consultant for the Downtown Greenway. We're excited today to host this webinar featuring a conversation between Radcliffe Bailey, the artist we have commissioned for our fourth and final cornerstone installation, and Ayla Amon, a member of our Downtown Greenway Freedom Cornerstone Focus Group. Public art is a key feature of the Downtown Greenway. To date, we have commissioned and installed 19 completed artworks, and the Greenway plans call for 12 more, including this Freedom Cornerstone. The Freedom Cornerstone will be located at the northeast corner of Murrow and Eastgate City Boulevards. Its theme is inspired by the city's role in the civil rights movement, especially the pivotal 1960 lunch counter sit-ins that served as a catalyst for the larger movement. Before I introduce both of our guests, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items that I hope will keep our webinar moving smoothly. It will be helpful for you to set your screen on gallery view so that you will view both Radcliffe and Ayla together on the screen as they talk. You should have a button, mine is at the top right corner of my Zoom screen, that allows you the option of selecting either gallery view or speaker view, so choose gallery. There is also a Q&A feature that on my screen is located on the bottom of my Zoom window. If you click on that, you will open a sidebar where you can type in and submit questions at any time during the conversation. I will monitor and compile those questions and send them to our panelists towards the end of our webinar. And now I would like to invite Radcliffe and Ayla to join us by video and welcome them as our guests.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Radcliffe Bailey lives and works in Atlanta, Georgia. He is a painter, sculptor, and mixed media artist who utilizes the layering of imagery, culturally resonant materials, and text to explore the themes of ancestry, race, migration, and collective memory. His work often incorporates found material and objects and layers them into textured compositions, including traditional African sculpture, tintypes of his family, members, ships, train tracks, and Georgia red clay. The cultural significance and rhythmic properties of music are also important influences that can be seen throughout his work. Individual experience also serves as a departure for Bailey. Found objects and imagery present seemingly bygone pasts as contemporary, neon northern stars that lead us through Bailey's constellation of works, exploring and interweaving our shared histories. Often quilt-like in aesthetic, his practice creates links between histories and potential futures. We are thrilled to welcome an artist of Radcliffe's stature to create a work for Greensboro. Ayla Amon, who will lead our conversation today with Radcliffe, is a member of our Freedom Cornerstone Focus Group, a panel that was created to work with our Downtown Greenway Art Selection panel on this last Cornerstone commission. Ayla is a contract curatorial assistant at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture and a visiting lecturer at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. She holds degrees in Islamic art and architecture, Middle Eastern studies, and museum studies from the University of Chicago and George Washington University, and has worked at the Art Institute of Chicago, the Walters Art Museum, and the Tangier American Legation Museum in Morocco. Ayla studies the African Muslim diaspora, specifically tracing the cultural and spiritual legacies of the enslaved African Muslims in North America. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished guests to our webinar today. Thank you both for being here, and I'll let you all take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Mr. Radcliffe Bailey, for having this conversation with me today. I want to start. I know that Barbara has introduced you and your work a little bit, but I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about your work. What kind of themes and topics do you engage? What kind of media do you like to work with?
I like to work with everything. When I was in school, I was a sculpture major. And so I'm kind of like a painter a sculptor who paints. I work with all different types of materials. When I began making the work when I finished college, I was influenced by a lot of things that were close by me, be it my family members. Like my grandmother gave me photographs right before she died. She didn't know anything about my work, but she gave me close to photographs of family members, and I felt as if I obligated to work around those images. And I began working from that point of what was closest to me, which was my grandparents and my mother and my father. I've always been interested in trying to trace the past, especially as an African American artist at the time when I was making work. We didn't have tools in terms of like using our DNA to trace our past or try to understand those past histories and connect cross waters. And so I think a lot of my practice has been really about trying to search and figure out my identity beyond here. And material-wise, I just work within all different types of mirror. She mentioned something about me using Georgia clay, and some of the stuff with Georgia clay was just dealing with the past, be it like Native Americans, be it like blood that was shed on these grounds. I live on Civil War. I live on Civil War grounds, which is a part of the Battle of Utoy Creek, and so my neighborhood, was I have people in my neighborhood that were a part of the civil rights movement. I'm dealing on the grounds of Civil War. So pretty much to me, the South is my lab. Like in terms of materials, I work in all different types of materials. So, yeah.
I love that. And one of the things I really love about your art, and the piece that I'm most familiar with is the one at Namak, is that it's so intricate and detailed, and it really kind of draws the viewer in and asks them to have kind of a personal conversation and relationship with your work. And I'm wondering how you'll translate this method of working into these large-scale public art commissions, and what challenges you to do this commission, especially because there's also a landscape component to it. So how is that changing how you're approaching this?
I think the only challenge has really been the times that we live in right now. It's like when I was thinking about the commission, I wasn't thinking about at the beginning of it. Wasn't really like at the moment of Black Lives Matter. It wasn't at the moment of like all the Civil War monuments being moved. And I think I'm operating within the time. I usually try to avoid the times that are like current right now because I feel like I'm steeped in the past, but I also am very interested in the future. But it's funny how it just kind of lands on me at this perfect moment, which is like pushing me into spaces that I haven't been in yet. And so part of it was just dealing with the landscape, but then historically dealing with landscapes that have a past. So in a strange way, it's a very interesting, the way in which I operate right now behind the actual work that sometimes people actually see is very different. I work in a way in which I deal with layers, and I've always felt like once I came to the seventh layer, sometimes it's actually seven physical layers, or sometimes it's seven layers of thought. But once I come to that seventh layer, that's when I know that I'm in the right space. And a lot of it's about the past and a lot it's about the present, but the present usually finds itself out later on in the work. I don't know if I answered that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of brought it up, but we're obviously currently living in this moment where there are a lot of monuments, either monuments to the Confederacy or people like Christopher Columbus, that are being torn down and kind of publicly challenged. And we've also seen this very large scale public reactions to the continued police brutality and injustice against Black Americans. So I'm thinking of like Lafayette Square in DC. And then here in Greensboro, all along Elm Street, all the plywood boards were beautifully painted by all these artists expressing messages of strength and unity and resilience for Black Lives Matter. So what does it mean for you to be creating, to be actively putting up public art and a monument in this time?
Wow. It gives me a little bit of, I mean, I'm in a comfortable space in terms of working with a monument kind of space right now. It gives me a little bit of chills. It pushes me to a certain place. I have a lot of surprises with the work. I think when you mentioned this, I was thinking about, there was a moment I was taking a trip and I'm used to traveling up and down to visit family members that are up north during holidays, during moments I don't want to go, be it a funeral, be it those kind of like times that are very important. And I remember not too long ago taking a trip, and it was around the time of Charlottesville. And at the same time, my grandparents lived basically like maybe 15 to 20 miles away from Charlottesville. And thinking about that, there was a moment I really thought about those monuments and really thinking about them in a different way. Um, and yeah, and then it's also, here's another part, is just dealing with the sit-ins and dealing with the HBCUs and dealing with the fact that, you know, like the Black Lives Matter movement have happened. There were also like sit-ins at universities. And the university it's very like we're very much within the fact that we've never really gotten straight. I think the real deal that really have never really been integrated in terms of the way in which we think all people. And I think right now we're fighting to figure out and make it right. I don't think out of any disrespect, but you know, we are basically trying to make it right. And you know, we have the world looking at us in terms of the way we deal with these things. You know, the world also deals with its own issues. You know, you're dealing with like a place like Belgium, dealing like the Congo, Leopold, and how do you deal and how do you address all these kind of situations and these monuments that exist? Do you put them in a museum somewhere far away? Or I mean, how do you deal with it? It's very complicated. I don't necessarily want to address an oppressor and not be upset. You know, I want to, you know, it needs to be right. And so it's difficult. You know, somebody who represented slavery, you know, they don't need to exist in my life in that way. I don't think they need to exist in public in that way. So yeah.
That kind of taps into, with this cornerstone, as many of our viewers and listeners might know, and as Barbara hinted at, the theme of this fourth and final cornerstone is freedom. And I'm hoping you could talk a little bit more about what freedom means to you in the context of your art, and also how you're conceiving of freedom as part of this piece and the story that it tells.
Freedom. I'll jump around about this, about freedom. I never start from the beginning and end at the end. Sometimes I start in the middle. But when I think about freedom, I think about a lot of things. I think about, of course, I think about from the place of my family, but I think about them and their choice to move to Atlanta back in 1972. I think about them living in New Jersey. My family's from New Jersey and Virginia. And I also think about the fact that my father's family was a part of the Underground Railroad, and they would migrate north, and they got north to a certain point where they stopped within South Jersey. So they never did get to Canada, but that was the goal, to get to Canada, but also cross the Mason-Dixon. So I think about that in terms of freedom, that past history. You know, I think about myself and the freedom to be, the freedom to do what I do, freedom of expression. I think about it in a lot of different ways. It's constantly coming up. I think about it in terms of, I don't feel as if we really quite have it yet. Once we're all free, there's a certain place that we go. There's a certain place to be. I don't necessarily I like to make work that deals with celebration of who I am. I deal with conflict, but I also deal with it in a different way. And I think in terms of this piece itself, it's like, you know, I think about a structure that goes up in the sky that deals with a ladder, a railroad track that turns into a ladder that goes north. It goes high in the sky, but I also deal with a space, a public space for people to congregate, a space where people can express creative thoughts. I think of a place where, you know, it's not a place where people can talk about things. You know, I really enjoy seeing, like, you know, the Black Lives Matter markings that go across the country in public squares. I think about myself like creating somewhat of a public square. I think about how close it is to the HBCUs. I think about those relationships those many people who cross those streets and walk down. I think about it in terms of like living in Atlanta, we lost a giant, which is John Lewis. I think about that. I think about the way he thought. I thought about those acts, and think about in terms of subject of freedom. A lot of it's really about freedom to express oneself, and so that's where I think about it in terms of the square, to be able to operate within that kind of space where people can change.
So in the terms of using freedom here, how are you hoping that your message of freedom might resonate across different groups in the city, BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, the immigrant communities here, women, in addition to the people who are obviously connecting it to the long history of civil rights and slavery here in North Carolina?
Right. Now, there's a lot of things. That's a lot for an artist, but I think the act of me expressing it the best way I can, which, I'm really interested in power to all people in their practices, their beliefs, gender, all across the board. I come from a situation, a place in my life where, I remember doing tracing my DNA and tracing my mother's side to like Mende. And within the practice of the Mende, women run the society in a particular way. And so I think about that. I think about all those things in a very basic way. And my sensibility is, I'm sensitive towards all people. And I hope within my work, it comes out in that way. It's very hard to, explain how one comes up with a way of working. My practice in itself, just in general, the way I work, I try to solve problems every day. But it's also, it presents situations it's like I'm playing chess with myself. I often, think of myself as like corner myself in this corner, and I enjoy losing just so I can learn from the experience. But I don't know. I think I will address as much as I can. I think it's within a space and within a work. I think it's almost like a certain mood, a certain sound. There's the elements of sound that'll be a part of my work. There's thoughts, there's poetry. There's a lot of things that I'm looking at incorporating. There's architecture. There's I don't know. I think it's there. I think some of it may be in terms of participation. I want to create a space where all people are welcome. And, that's kind of the goal. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think thinking of it in terms of the public square, you definitely are creating this inclusive and publicly accessible space for all people, hopefully. And it also kind of makes it this interesting public art and public history crossover that's happening. And I'm wondering so this is the fourth cornerstone. The other three are tradition, innovation, and motion, all of which have been important to Greensboro in various ways. So I'm wondering how you see your cornerstone, the Freedom Cornerstone, as being in conversation with these three that already exist, and if the city of Greensboro is bringing something specific to this space and this creation for you.
I think they'll probably have a good conversation. I think of it like music. I think of it like different musicians all coming together to create somewhat of a rhythm, a sound. I think so. It's hard for me to speak on other people's work, but from what I've gathered and the work that I've seen, I've enjoyed, and I think it's inspired me in many ways. Just basically about the way in which we're working through the materials and we're working through the landscape. And I think it's very interesting just to be able to cross through some of these spaces. I like the way the work is addressing the community. I think it's a beautiful thing. I hope that I touch and deal with, or tell somewhat of a story that connects in different ways. I think we connect in different ways. I think artists in general, we all connect no matter what. It's just there's a certain place where we are. You know, I think it's curated very well.
So can we talk about a couple of your other public art commissions that you've completed so far? I'm thinking of the larger scale ones like Vessel 3 and From the Cabinet at Auburn Avenue Research Library. Would you like to share anything about those works with us and how maybe you're learning lessons you're using lessons you learned in those commissions to apply here as well?
Right. Vessel. Vessel was made as a part of Prospect in New Orleans. And basically, so Vessel is like a steel cylinder that deals with sound. It was made in New Orleans. On the inside of Vessel, there's a speaker system that's built on the inside of Vessel, a stereo system, and it plays the sound of, it actually deals with some of the similar subject of freedom. There was a fire. I basically worked with a musician. We created a fire, and the fire was, we started a fire at midnight, and it was on a full moon, and we recorded sounds of my friend that's a musician. He was playing cello, and he was playing in the background, and the sound was about escaping and freedom, and it was about people migrating. So you could hear the sounds of the fire burning, you can hear the sounds of trains in the background, and you can hear oceans coming in. The piece itself is located in a park in New Orleans, and in between the railroad tracks and then also the Mississippi. And so that piece was very specific towards that actual space. And there are sounds that come outside of a conch shell, which is probably the next image. And so, yeah, sounds come out the conch, which are coming, speakers were built on the inside. So there's a part of that you know, may relate to what I'm thinking about in terms of Greensboro. Trying to figure out ways to incorporate that kind of sound where, you know, it's also dealing with time and technology and how things will change within years and years away. And then I guess we'll go over to the next piece, From the Cabinet. From the Cabinet is a piece that it may be very difficult for you to see the angles of the piece, but it's a piece, it's based around a library that's in Atlanta on Auburn Avenue, and it's from the Cabinet. And it was based around a scholar that we knew in Atlanta named Richard Long, and he passed away, and I went to do a piece that was about him, and I think pretty much his papers at Auburn Avenue Research Center, and it's from the Cabinet, and the idea was to create a piece that dealt with things in the library, but then also my own personal history. So you have like a ladder that turns into a DNA strand, you have like someone who was fighting in the Civil War, you have history of music, be it like some of it's like the history of those slavery, but then also goes to like Marxist discovery, and it goes to different people. And part of the piece was to house and to deal with the sounds that are recorded, some of the recordings that are in the library. And so on the back side of the actual piece, on the back of the library, there's a steel Victrola, and the steel Victrola plays like the sounds that come that are recorded inside the library, so someone could curate it throughout time. And this one's called From the Cabinet.
So are you hoping to use some of these same kind of themes here in Greensboro on your work? Are you looking at the same kind of monumentality of this piece?
I'm looking at space in a different way. I'm looking at concrete in terms of spaces that you can walk in and that you can sit in. And then, you know, it's also I'm thinking about spaces in the same way, but it's more about occupying a certain space, a certain kind of landscape. And I think that the part of it that's going to be interesting is dealing with, let's take, for instance, architecture. I'm very interested in like architecture that was from plantations that show like, you know, the practices of Africans, enslaved Africans, and the way in which they may have created certain types of structures. And I'm looking at that. I'm also looking at constellations and the way in which people view the stars in terms of migrating from north to south. You know, as far as, you know, dealing with my own personal history, I like to make things that are very connected to my own personal history, enough that it also connects to the history at large. And so it's not as specific about me as much as it is about people in general. So it's about that architecture, it's about that space where people operate within. You know, someone could actually, you know, have a study session within the space. Someone could probably play chess. It could be like a combination of stuff. Those that could have like a somewhat of a concert within the space. I'm looking at it in a lot of different ways, and you know, dealing with that as well as the history and thinking about those who escaped slavery and migrated north and come through the South, and tracing that along with my own personal routes, and with my father being a railroad engineer, and we also catching the train and moving throughout the South in the middle of the night. So some of it's about traveling by night. So it's a combination of a lot of different thoughts. It deals with the history in a different way with the sit-ins. I want to do it in a very different way. I want to be very active. I want to also honor the fact that, you know, what we want in terms of the histories and the growth as people, you know, as well as like I'm very interested in like HBCUs and the way in which we operate and have operated throughout time. And so I'm really like thinking about a lot of those different thoughts. And some of it was based around going through libraries as a kid at Atlanta University and searching for information. And then also like just different universities, different libraries that carried a lot of information.
I think conceiving of this in terms of movement migration is really interesting, because this is also going to be on a path made for movement of people in the city. This is going to be on a greenway that people can use to circumnavigate the city. So I think there's a real resonance there that hopefully people will pick up on when they're viewing this and connecting it to their own movements and migrations and histories of that.
Right. There'll probably be elements of text that will exist. There was one part of it, I'm interested in, like, you know, like the old cobble streets that exist in a lot of cities. Some of those cobble streets exist up under some of the pavement. I'm interested in, like, you know, the people who did those streets, who made those roads, and, you know, left it the granite. And, you know, I think about the history of that, but then also that same rock that was used to make those monuments, and reincorporating it in a different way. I'm always interested in using materials that have a past. And I think I'm actually, in part of this piece, I'm actually going to use materials that were actually part of the past. So that's another layer of it within.
So found in historical materials will play a part in this. That's great. And you've definitely tapped into it and given us a couple little insights, but would you mind giving the viewers maybe a little insight into what you're considering in this work? You mentioned sound, you've mentioned found materials. Are you considering, as in some of the other monuments, light or text, or some of them have used plants to communicate history around these spaces? So are there any other insights you might be able to share with us about your thought process for this?
Hit it all. Yeah. No, I think of it light. I think about a certain kind of light that deals with a North Star. I think about you know, the difference of wood or cuts of wood, the wall, like almost like a casting. I think about, I do think about plants and the history of plants and the way in which, they can tell somewhat of a story. I think that that's the newest part of the work that, as being a part of this project has put me in a space where I didn't expect to be in. Thought that I'd be doing that in my own yard, but now I'm doing it in public, which is a beautiful thing. I think that has opened me up into another layer of my work. So that's a beautiful thing. I think it's very interesting when, you make work and you're challenged in such a way that it pushes you in a different space that you haven't been. And I think that that's a good space. I think that's actually a very good space right now, especially considering all the stuff that's going on in the world and what it's left me to kind of be focused in a different way where I have to stay at home. I have to work this particular way. I have to think about it. I have to look at it. I don't have any distractions. I feel like I'm on somewhat of a residency to, reinvent myself in a way. So, which is a beautiful thing. And I like that space. Sometimes we're so preoccupied with everything else that, I welcome the pause button in the world right now. So yeah, there's a lot of different elements in the world. And I think right now it's like I enjoy that space where I'm able to search for those new elements. I couldn't tell you exactly all the parts that are there, but I have a clue. I know exactly where it's going. I know where it's at. Yeah, I feel good.
Well, you hinted at a little bit, and it sounds like you're being much more productive in quarantine than a lot of us, me included, are being. So I'm just kind of wondering, how are you connecting with the arts community, both in Atlanta, nationally, internationally, and what's inspiring your creativity in the midst of this quarantine and pandemic?
Well, I'm not really when I think about the arts community, I think about it in a different way. I think part of the fact is that I live in Atlanta. I stay close to a lot of people that I grew up with, high school, middle school. I still see, people's parents at the grocery store. I'm very much like within a community here that when I think about my arts community, I think about those that are closest to me that don't know much about art. I think about the conversations I have with them, because when making work like this, the work is not just speaking to the art world, it's speaking to those that are outside the art world. And so I really find myself grounded and close to friends and people that are close to me. And sometimes it's good to really take yourself outside of that art world and just go back into like this zone of, who you are. And I think around that kind of space, if you give it a certain amount of time, certain things will.
So I'm curious, so if someone comes upon this piece like 100 years from now, they're walking the circuit of the Greenway, what is it you're hoping they'll receive from it?
Hope it's still there. I don't know. I think about, someone encountering it, and I want to make work that's timeless. I want to deal with work that deals with steeped in the past, but I also want it to be steeped in the past, and also be able to talk to the present. I feel like I have to go way back in the past in order to go forward. I think one of my favorite musicians is Sun Ra. And Sun Ra has this kind of music where it seems like he plays a bunch of different time zones. And Sun Ra believed that he was from Saturn. He was from Alabama, Birmingham. But I think of work that's timeless. I think of I want to create work that's timeless. I'm not saying that I make work that's timeless. My goal is to create something that's timeless and that can go throughout time. But then it can remind you of the past in such a way, but it also moves forward. And that's a part of the freedom of it too for me, is just to be able to figure out a way to make work that just does that. It's like a poem, like a haiku. I want to be able to say visually like speak in a very poetic way, and that poem still exists, and it holds its own. Yeah, and I think that, as time changes, I wanted also to create a work that can be updated in such a way. And I think with the green space about it, with the landscaping part of it, it's able to change. I think it could change throughout seasons, and I think it should just change throughout time, and it speak its own and create its own history. In some way, maybe there was something that happened that related to someone, and it was very personal. Let's just say someone got married there. Let's say someone had conversations there that were very important. I want to create that space where people feel comfortable.
Speaking about the historicity of your work and how it kind of resonates today, it makes me think of the piece you displayed at the Istanbul Biennial, the Nomo. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you conceived of that piece, how you see it speaking in these very similar ways with history, but to the present and also to the future.
Okay. That piece was committed to Istanbul Biennale within this Biennale. And I was, this is the first time me making a piece that was outside the country. So I made it in Turkey, in Istanbul, and it was a piece that was really about travel. It was about travel. There's elements of sound within this piece as well. Like in all three of the pieces that you've shown, that everyone has sound. This one has like a radio in the background that's playing some of Summer's music, and then it talks about if you find Earth boring, just the same old thing. And it says sign up for Outer Spaceways Incorporated. Summer was always a part of my work, some of the interest in terms of the way in which he played. But then also I traced some of the histories of him playing in Istanbul. And he played on the back of a trailer. And they drove throughout Istanbul and they played on the back of this trailer. And I remember seeing the video of it. Someone shared it to me as I was doing some of my research. And what I was dealing with was the history of those enslaved and coming over on ships. And so you have that same part of that's incorporated is I recreated the bottom of a ship, and that radio is playing the sound that's within it. And it was really about some of the things that are happening in the world and some of the stuff that pollution in the ocean and this other continent that's been created of pollution. And so I was really dealing with some of like the transatlantic slave trade and the fact that certain people ended up in certain parts of the world, and some of the currents throughout, be it Brazil, be it, Haiti, be it, throughout all the different South. And, that's always been like something that's been on the back of my mind, to make work from someone who's operating in southern parts of the United States, make something that's even universal enough to be acknowledged and known throughout the world. And sometimes I think that some of our histories are not necessarily acknowledged in the same way. And so that was something that piece was about. The images of the guy, the figure, I use the figure sometimes. That's like from a death mask, and it was I collected it from a Belgian antique store. And so I made casts of the actual cast, and it was really dealing with travel. It's called Nomo, and it's based around the Dogon. There are some elements that are dealing with the piece that I'm working on that's based on a ladder, but the actual shape of a Y-shaped ladder, which I'm thinking about in terms of Greensboro, which is almost like a walkway that deals with walking and being able to connect within different spaces. But it also deals with the routes, some of the routes, as you see, like images of the routes during the slave trade, how they moved in different directions and based on, the currents sailing throughout the seas.
Great. I think a lot of these themes that you're bringing up in your work will really resonate with a lot of people here in Greensboro who have come from a lot of different places, come from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different understandings of what is art, what is public art. So I think it will give them a place to be in this public square together and have these kind of conversations that you're hoping. it will promote. So we have a couple of questions from our audience that I'm going to bring to you now. And the first of which is, what excites you about working in Greensboro in particular?
Greensboro, what excites me? I think Greensboro has been a place that I've kind of spent like, I mean, I think earlier I mentioned the fact that I've always driven through Greensboro. I'm familiar with universities. I've kind of spent some time within the area. When I think about North Carolina in general as an artist, North Carolina was the first state where I actually had a museum show as shortly after college. And so when I think about North Carolina, when I think about North Carolina, I think about those kind of experiences. I think about those relationships between those institutions. I also think about, and this is something, you know, I jump around a little bit on, but I think about the South in general as more like a lab. And, you know, and I go as far as to Texas and as, you know, all the way throughout the East Coast. And I think about it in terms of like a lab for me, in terms of my own personal histories. And my family members migrating from all these different angles. Greensboro reminds me of like when I coming through on the train with my father, and just having like that kind of like experience of like a daydream. It's funny. It's like dreaming at night as I travel as a kid. I kind of wonder what it was like, you know, for people traveling. And later on in life, I realized like I've been very interested in those who were migrating through the South to the North. But it means, I don't know. Greensboro is an interesting place. I've come to Greensboro during different times, homecomings. I've kind of partied in Greensboro, kind of just enjoyed Greensboro. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I answered. I also I'm very much interested on like the Carolinas in general, especially off the coast. I think some of my first influences off the coast of the Carolinas were understanding, you know, those that are Gullah and some of the practices throughout those areas. And knowing parts of my own personal history, but not knowing everything, because there's certain parts of it that we don't know. But I also think about, you know, those ports, those places which Africans came through. And what excites me about it is like going into some of those histories and being able to incorporate it. That's always been like a springboard for me, is really trying to understand the makeup of the people within a certain area.
So kind of a related follow-up question to that, someone wants to know, given your ongoing interest in music as it relates to the expression of personal freedom, just curious if you're familiar with the nearby historic Magnolia House and all of the Black musicians and performers there, including Ray Charles, James Brown, Joe Tex, Tina Turner.
Yeah, yeah. I wish I could stay there and just hear those walls talk. Yeah, I'm very familiar with what was going on in terms of the way places in which you stay. And I think about, you know, the piece. I'm thinking about the piece in terms of how close it is to the Magnolia House. I think it's very interesting too. And I am trying to draw those connections. Some of those I'm really like, you know, I've been listening to certain music, certain people who've gone that way. My first passion was baseball, and I've always been interested in, you know, Negro leagues in terms of the practices, and you know, just in terms of the music itself, the jazz musicians. You know, that's always, there's been a certain era, a certain time period that's always been really like, it opens me up towards like understanding the past just as much as those things that you read about. I think that the sounds take me into a different place. It's almost like sometimes you go into an antique shop, you're able to smell time, smell the past, you see that kind of patina that exists. And I think that those histories that exist are always constantly talking to me. And I think hopefully the piece will have this conversation where it talks to that past as well as gives it a space for the present as well. So.
Absolutely. And someone else pointed out very astutely, the cornerstone's in a very visible location. So how will size and scale be important, and how will color play into that?
And a very visible.
It's in a very visible location. So how will size and scale be important, and how might color play into that as well?
I think size is important. I think if there's any, I think about color, but I think it's a very subtle thing. I want it to, I want it to exist within the landscape, and I kind of want to go underground in a way with it, where we're dealing with height, and it's almost like you're walking. It's almost like you're walking underground in a way. It's a kind of space where I'm playing with the landscape. That's my plan. Is to play with the landscape, to deal with light, to deal with not just when I say light, I mean, I'm referring to kind of like a color of light, which deals with like a blue. And sometimes when I go through North Carolina, I think about the color blue. But it's also like, I like the imprint of the clay. I like the color of Georgia clay. I like those natural colors. I like for it to feel as if you're like in some type of bunker and you're going through time, and you're able to be at a different level. I think I'm really playing with certain heights, like we're 5 feet high, in terms of going under the ground. But yeah, color, I think that stuff is in there.
Someone else wants to know, what is the art on the wall behind you? Are these works you're currently working on?
Well, these are some studies that I'm dealing with in terms of like trains and railroad tracks, and I think as I'm working, the thoughts for this commission, I'm also just working in my head to make objects, and some of these objects are just twisted and working in metal, and kind of going back to welding and cutting and bending and travel. So yeah.
And I think this will probably be our final question for time. But how do you approach getting to know a place? How do you learn about the people who live there? What is your research process? And how open is that process to hearing and responding to the community's ideas?
Right. I think it's important. I think it's important to have conversations. I think it's important to, how can you say it? It's like the more people you have conversations with, the team becomes. And the team itself should have a certain kind of soul, a certain it's also an artist. The artist, the way in which we operate is it can be different. All different artists, we all work different ways. Let's just say that, and we try to figure out ways to incorporate information in such a way where we address everyone's needs. But we have to do that and balance it between our own personal needs. And so, for me, it's about taking as much information as I can from different people, starting from a point of what you're most familiar with within an area, and learning, opening up, and just seeing. I think that the one thing for me with this project is, because of this whole virus, it's kind of thrown me for a loop, because I really expected to spend more time getting to know people, and I think that hopefully I will have time in the next few months to actually come and visit, and when it's safe enough, because we're here in Georgia and we operate from a different place. So hopefully I can gather more patina and create a piece that that's much thicker. I'm hoping to add those layers. I think that if I was really to look at the work right now, probably like, I operate from 7 layers, but I'm probably in like 4. So there are other parts that need to become a part of the work as well.
Well, here's to hoping that both Georgia and the Carolinas get this under control and you can visit again really soon to start putting that patina on this work. Right before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like the city of Greensboro, the people of Greensboro, to know about how you're conceiving of this work or what it means to you to be working here?
It means a lot to me. I think that just like as an artist, there's moments when you shift and you go in different directions. I think that this is a beautiful moment for me. It's very timely. I have a tendency to try to avoid the news. Half the time the news is so bad that I want to focus on what's so good. I'm a person who celebrates, and hopefully within the work I'm creating a space I can celebrate as well as be free in thought and free to be. And I'm excited about it. And it's just I'm working in a different way, and there have been different moments, different times in my life where in a direction to operate or think about a different way, which is, made me grow as a person. And like one of my best friends told me, consider myself forever a student of the then and now, and always consider myself as forever emerging. So.
Well, I know I speak for myself, and I think I speak for a lot of other people in Greensboro that we're really excited to have you working on this piece, and we're so excited to see the final product. So I'd like to thank everyone on screen for joining. Thank you also to the Greensboro Downtown Greenway for having us host this conversation. And especially thank you so much, Mr. Radcliffe Bailey, for having this conversation with me today. And with that, I will turn this back over to Dabney to give us our closing for today.
Great. So I'm Dabney Sanders. I'm the project manager for the Downtown Greenway, and I'd like to echo Ayla's thanks and also extend a thanks to Ayla and Radcliffe personally for spending this hour with us. It's been a great conversation. We are excited that Radcliffe will be sharing his proposal for the Freedom Cornerstone with us with the art selection panel in mid-September. And then we look forward to the opportunity to share that with the greater public at large as a part of our community engagement process. I'd also like to thank everyone who joined us on the webinar. We had over 50 people join us during this past hour, and we will be posting this recording on our website as well. And so I would encourage you, if you enjoyed this conversation, to share that opportunity with others to enjoy it later. So thank you all so much for being here, and we look forward to Radcliffe's proposal, and we look forward to this Freedom Cornerstone coming to Greensboro. So thank you.